When you're considering importing goods from Alibaba, it can be pretty overwhelming, especially if it's your first time importing anything from overseas. But this video is going to help take the stress out of it for you and hopefully make it actually a fun process for you as well as a profitable one. The process is simpler than you imagine, but there definitely are some mistakes that you can make that could end up costing you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. But the good news is I've made a ton of mistakes in the 10 years that I've been importing goods from China. So I'm going to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes as me. Hey guys, my name's Andy and welcome to the channel. And these are the things you need to be thinking about when you're importing goods from Alibaba. So first up, when you go to source a product, you need to know what your budget is. So you need to know what price you need to get it at in order to make enough profit margin on it. So a good way to do that is work out what you can sell it for and then set your target price based on that. If you've spoken to a few suppliers and you're finding that you just can't get it for that price, how can you sort of save some money on it? So can you use a different material? Is there a cheaper way of manufacturing it? Do you need a custom logo? Do you need a logo at all? Can it just be blank and then you can sort of whack a sticker on it yourself or something like that? If you're stuck and you're sort of thinking, I don't know how to make this any cheaper, ask your supplier. They might actually be able to suggest some ways. If you say, look, we can't make profit on that, how can we get the price down? They'll often be able to suggest a couple of ways. It will probably just mean it's a slightly less quality product, but it'll still be good enough to sell. Obviously, if you buy in larger quantities, you should be able to get the price down, but I'm always wary about that, especially if it's a new product that's not proven yet, because the last thing you want to be doing is just getting like heaps of something in and then finding that actually it's not as popular as you thought it would be, and then you're just stuck with like loads of stock that you can't sell. And this advice is coming from a man who at one point had an apartment that was pretty much half full of just boxes of stuff I couldn't sell. So you don't want to end up like that. So when you're doing your budget and cost calculations, there are a couple of things which you may not be thinking about, which you need to factor in. So first up is your import tax and duties. In Australia, for example, which is where I live, you're going to be paying, so first of all, there's a $1,000 tax-free threshold. So if you're importing goods under the total value of 1,000 Australian dollars, then you don't pay any import tax, you don't pay any import duties. It just flies straight through customs with no extra cost. So that's great, especially if you're starting off and you're just buying small quantities. It's actually really, really useful. If you are importing over $1,000, and remember this is just for Australia, so you'll need to check it out for your country if you're not in Australia. But if you're importing over $1,000 worth of goods in Australia, you'll need to pay 10% GST, which you can obviously claim back if you are registered for GST. And then you'll need to pay import duties, which is about 5% generally for most goods, but it will vary, so you'll need to check that. In order to check that, ask your supplier for an HS code, which is like a universal worldwide code that relates to the category that your goods in, and then you can look that up on the government website. I'll link to that in the description. There's also a way to avoid paying import duties. So if you're importing from China, for example, there's the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. So if the goods you're importing falls under that, you don't pay any duty on that at all. It's probably a bit too complex to go into in this video, so that will be on a future video, so subscribe if you want to see that. And the final cost to do with import duties and taxes is like the clearance or admin fee, which whoever's sort of importing it for you, that's like their admin fee to do it basically. So for example, DHL, FedEx is about $90. So you'll receive an invoice saying this is how much tax there is, this is how much duties there is, and then like $90 goes to DHL or FedEx for doing that service for you. So yeah, make sure you factor that in, because that can be a surprise for someone, especially if you're sort of new to the game. You go, yeah, brilliant, I can make enough margin on this. Then it gets stuck at the borders, and then all of a sudden you get an extra invoice and you're like, wow, well, that's my whole profit margin gone, you know? The other cost you need to be thinking about is freight costs. So generally there's sort of two options. You got air freight or sea freight. In very basic terms, air freight is usually more expensive, but way quicker and easier. For example, like I mentioned, the couriers like DHL, FedEx, they take a lot of the stress out for you by handling the sort of the customs paperwork, everything like that. The other option is sea freight, which is usually cheaper, but it takes a lot longer. So it'd be like 4 to 6 weeks instead of sort of 2 to 4 days. And you need to be careful because there's different types of sea freight. Like for example, very cheap sea freight means you have to go to the port and collect it yourself. So you might have to rent a truck or whatever, or arrange a courier to pick it up from the port, and it's just It's a lot more hassle. I wouldn't recommend that, especially if it's your first time doing it. You also need to make sure that the customs paperwork is going to be handled by an agent. I mean, I've never done it, but I think you can do it yourself, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that again if you're new to it. So yeah, anyway, back to cost. You need to be getting the quote for the freight costs up front at the same time as you're getting the quote for your products. So recently, for example, my missus ordered some sports equipment, and so she got a sample of the sports equipment, loved it, already knew the price for the bulk order. I went, yeah, okay, let's go ahead for the bulk order. They then sent the freight costs, which they hadn't done initially, and it was like huge. And we were like, we don't know if they were sort of exaggerating the freight costs, because by that point, we'd already let them know, yeah, we're dead set on these, we're really keen. So they might have been being truthful about the freight costs. They did seem a little bit high to me, and it felt like they kind of had us over the barrel a bit because they already knew we were keen on placing the bulk order. So get those costs up front, and then they're sort of locked in, and then you've got a clearer idea of your margins. So in this example, we weren't on selling them. They're actually going to be used for something else. So we went ahead of the order, but yeah, we maybe spent a few hundred more than we would have done otherwise if we'd have got the quote up front. All right, now let's talk a bit about the buying process. So one of the things you're going to come across when you first start trying to source a product, or when you're first talking to suppliers, is MOQ. That means minimum order quantity. If you're just starting out, you're not going to want a huge order of something. A, you might have budget constraints, but B, you might not know if that product is going to be a seller, if there's a big market for it, if you're positioned correctly to sell it, especially if it's kind of like a new product which you've sort of adapted or tweaked from an existing idea. So generally, I would try and get a low MOQ for your first order. Now, you'll probably see on their suppliers, the MOQ, or minimum order quantity, they're saying like, it'll vary, right? But it could be like 200 items. I've found most of the times that that's not actually the real MOQ. If you speak to them, they will do it for lower. So you might need to say, look, we're happy to do that for future orders, but the initial order needs to be a quantity of 100 instead of 200. Most of them will sort of say, oh, we don't normally do that, but we'll make an exception. So definitely ask the question if that MOQ is the real MOQ. I've said MOQ a lot of times now. MOQ. And sort of linked to that, you want to be coming across like you're a bigger business than you are. So always be talking about, say, look, we're looking for a long-term relationship. We're looking for a long-term supplier of goods. We're try and make out like you're an established sort of retailer already. Ideally, if you've already got a website and an email address with a proper domain name, that's only going to help, because they'll look at you and go, oh, wow, there's like good money. This is a good opportunity for us to build a relationship here. Not always going to be possible, especially if you're selling on Amazon or something rather than sort of your own website. You may not have all of that, but I mean, you could always set up like a Gmail address if you just buy a domain name for, you know, whatever your name is, importing.com, and then just have that email address. That will help because it will add a bit of credibility to you. Don't let them know it's my first time or whatever you do. When you're talking to them as well, another thing which we like to do is pretend that we're not the decision maker. Just find that helps with the negotiation process. So basically, anytime they say a price or whatever, and something you're not happy with, you can say, oh, sorry, my boss is not happy with that. It just helps. And because they do the same, they'll say, oh, my boss says this is as low as we can go. And then you can say, oh, sorry, my boss says this is as high as we can go. Like when you're paying, never pay 100% up front, pay like 30% before the order, and then like 70% before shipping. And you can say something like, oh, sorry, my boss says this is company process. We can't place the order otherwise. That 30% upfront payment, or it can be 50%, that sort of is your deposit for them to go ahead and make the order, because especially if it's a custom order, they're not going to be willing to do that unless you put a down payment down. Then they can send photos and videos of the finished product, and then you make the rest of the payment, and then they actually ship the goods to you. But before you even get to that stage, you should have already received a sample from them in most cases. Now, don't worry if the sample cost is bigger than the unit cost when you're placing the bulk order. That's pretty normal, especially if you're getting like a custom logo on it, because they still have to set up like the mold, if it's a molded logo, or like if it's a printed, like a screen printed logo, then there's costs involved in setting up the screen. So let's say, for example, your unit cost for the bulk order is going to be $10. Don't be surprised if the cost for the sample is $50. And that's fine. Don't worry about paying that. And then even if you get the sample and you go, this is rubbish, don't think, I've just lost $50, or it'll be more than that with the shipping costs. Don't say, I've just lost $100, $150. What you've actually done is you've spent $100 or $150 to dodge the bullet of just going straight in for the bulk order and losing thousands of dollars on something that's subpar. To save costs on samples, you might even be able to just get them to create the sample and then just send you like some detailed videos. And then, because, you know, generally the shipping cost is going to cost more than the sample for a lot of items. So if you can just get them to send really good videos and you feel like that's enough, depending on how complex the product is, you might be able to say, that's actually good. Yeah, go ahead with the bulk order from there. I'll probably get it sent to you though, depending on how big the bulk order is going to be, because like I said at the start of the video, there's definitely risks and you can end up losing hundreds, if not thousands. So then the main aim in the game is to avoid doing that, okay? Even if it takes a little bit longer because you're waiting for a sample, then you're going back to them, then you're getting the bulk order. I was chatting the other day to my barber, and it wasn't my usual guy, but we just got talking and he was like, I told him what I did, and he was saying, he actually at one point was importing t-shirts and jeans, and he was importing them from China, and then he switched to a supplier in Turkey that looked great, and he got a sample and he wanted to make some changes, got another sample, wanted to make some more changes, and at that point they said, sorry, you can't make any more changes. I think because they were like a big factory, and at that time he wasn't particularly big, so at that point they said, sorry, you can't make any more changes, you either get these or you don't. So he went ahead with the order, and long story short, he's now got like 100 pairs of jeans and 100 t-shirts he can't sell because they're not right. So that's what you want to avoid. I've been there myself. Like I said, I had an apartment, just one corner of one room, like probably a third of the room was just stacked up with boxes of just shit which I couldn't sell. Ended up going in landfill, most of it, unfortunately. Like, give some to charity shop, just lots of random items, and the rest of it went to landfill, which, yeah, so you want to avoid that at all costs. Probably it's going to happen at some point. It's just part of doing business. And before you get the sample, make sure you already know the price for the bulk order. Don't say, how much is the sample? Get the sample, then say, I love it. How much is the bulk order? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't anyway. But yeah, so what you want to be doing is going, right, what's the price for the bulk order? And then saying, right, okay, I'm happy with that. Now let's get the sample sorted. Now let's talk about samples. Or you can do it all in one go to save the back and forth. But whatever you do, don't get the sample. Tell them you love it, and then say, right, how much for the bulk order? That's probably the worst thing you can do, because they will just double the price. And finally, here's a big point that I just want to get into before I wrap things up. And by the way, this is just a bit of a brain dump of sort of my experience. If you want to know anything specific, drop in the comments below, and I'll make definitely some future videos on this topic. So get your questions in there. But the final one I just wanted to touch on in this video, if you're considering importing from Alibaba, or even importing from overseas in general for something, you need to ask yourself, do you really need to import from overseas? And that sounds mad, because obviously that goes against what this whole video is about. But there's quite a lot of cases where it's actually often cheaper, but definitely easier to just source it locally from within Australia. So for example, I get my my mailing boxes, like the actual boxes that I send items out in, they're custom printed. I always get them from within Australia. I could get them from overseas, but I don't know if you've ever seen stacks of card and paper. It's super heavy, so shipping is going to be really expensive on that. So they'd have to come by sea. So then it's adding, like, you know, that's the hassle of getting them by sea, which is like I said, 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, it varies so much, versus sort of, I can phone the factory in Australia and they'll be ready within a week and at my door the next day after that. And to be honest, it's not much more. And I'd much rather that. It just takes the hassle out of it. It's one less headache from sort of your already existing list of headaches. So just think about it like that. If you can get it locally for, honestly, for even a little bit more, but not too much more, definitely consider doing that just to take some of the hassle out of the process. But yeah, get your spreadsheets out, guys, figure it out for yourselves. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, drop a like, and I'll catch you next time.